Hello everyone. It's often difficult or impossible to change the course of a project or program we feel is heading for failure without limiting your own career. All of the presenter team here have experienced this and got together to share our thoughts on how to tackle it. The Systems Thinking SIG was created to facilitate collaborative working between project professionals and systems engineers back in 2013. And it's since evolved to share the benefits of systems thinking generally to managing projects and programs. So, Amanda.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Whittaker. Over my career, I've delivered projects and programs for global clients and across a range of industries. I specialize in customer-focused business transformation from strategy through to operations, and that includes technology transformation and digital engagement.
I'm Andrew Wright. I'm a long-term project and program manager and consultant that has seen too many of other people's projects fail because too little was done too late, and have suffered personally on my own projects for flagging problems up.
Hi all, I'm Cesar Rendora. I'm a chartered civil engineer and a practicing project professional. I'm experienced in the planning and delivery of major engineering projects, both in the UK and overseas. I've also been an Systems Thinking SIG committee member for 2 years now.
Hello, I'm Simon Tinling. I've spent most of my career working on complex equipment and infrastructure projects. I'm currently working to establish conditions for its success and avoidance of failure at the front end of a large nuclear infrastructure project.
I'm Tony Thornburn, ex-military of 35 years, with some time as a programme manager in Abbey Wood, circa 2000. And then lecturer in systems engineering at Cranfield University. And now I'm in the charity sector dealing with the health services, and similar issues that haunted me in defence acquisition are apparent elsewhere.
Hi, I'm Hugh Buckley. I've spent my career setting up and running large complex programs around technology and infrastructure, and most recently business change and transformation. And like the others here, I have some very painful personal experiences from finding myself in these kinds of situations.
So many projects are sponsored that can never really succeed because the selected solution cannot solve the perceived problem. This causes change, delays, cost overruns, each having environmental penalties, leaving project, program and portfolio managers to carry the blame. Perhaps the purpose wasn't clear, the benefits and outcomes not set right at the start. Alternatively, was the focus on solution specifications, not business requirements? Was the durability of the solution ignored? Or was the focus so tightly on delivering on time and on budget, the solution was so de-scoped, it delivered no benefits? As fighting climate change becomes ever more important, we can't afford current levels of failure.
So when we started to look at what's really going on and the major factors relating to programme success or failure, we began to identify 4 domains that seem relevant here. So in no particular order, firstly, we have stakeholders and their expectations who may or may not include the end customers, depending on your program. Secondly, the program delivery itself, by which we mean here the selected approach or solution, the capability you're building, and the delivery of all that to time, cost, and quality measures that we're all so familiar with. Thirdly, a lot of projects and programs have contractual and commercial arrangements put in place to underpin what the program is delivering. And finally, the needs and benefits that the program is attempting to satisfy. In effect, the justification for doing this in the first place. So these 4 domains all usually start off sufficiently well aligned in the early stages of any program. Otherwise, how else do you get the approval to proceed? So why do projects and programs head into trouble or even become doomed? As time progresses and things change, or new information emerges, or key assumptions are shown not to be valid, then one or more of these 4 domains is likely to diverge dramatically from where it started. And this typically is what we see as projects and programs head into trouble. Amanda.
So the initial target might be correct, and as time passes, the true needs and benefits start to be recognised. And that change could be just due to a shift in the external environment or through further discovery as the program progresses. So stakeholder expectations will typically follow that recognition of needs and benefits, but the delivery will be held back until commercial and contractual arrangements are changed. Also, once the program and project has started, stakeholder expectations will generally start to increase. That initial progress stimulates the ambitions of stakeholders, and the program delivery starts to fall behind those expected expectations. Contracts and commercials then fall behind, even though the true need has been revealed as something different from where we started. So if contracts and commercials are too restrictive, then the program and project delivers what was contracted. And again, you start to see that separation. So through time shows that there's changes to scope, which are vital for success, but success is deferred to a mythical phase 2. And finally, honesty in program reporting is essential to manage those expectations. If the culture won't tolerate failure, then the program delivery is reported to be on target. What you'll hear Hugh refer to as the watermelon, green on the outside, red on the inside. Once that gap can no longer be concealed, that then starts to become evident. And the crashes of the 737 MAX, which we'll take a look at later, is a good example of that.
Things change as time passes, context changes, requirements emerge, uncertainties are resolved, assumptions are refuted. What seemed a good idea at the time now looks like a white elephant. Post-COVID, there is less funding available, but more change needed. Projects need to be much more successful. Killing or correcting non-viable projects or programs early on, i.e. those that will not deliver the target benefits or have adverse environmental impacts, would offer huge benefits if we could do it.
I'm sure at least one of these scenarios seems painfully familiar to you. So how many of you have faced a project that you think is doomed to fail? So it looks like 36% were possibly doomed, and so it would appear that some or most of you have been able to manage these diversions in the past. Let's see how your approach aligns to ours.
So what happened when you tried to avert failure that was clear to you? Tony, what do you have to say about that?
Predominantly those in 1 to 2, you're clearly working in a good environment. So see how our approach compares with your own. 3 to 5, the challenge of truth to power. So again, you can see how our approach might apply practically and perhaps psychologically to your environments.
So can wasteful projects be killed or adjusted? Tony.
Okay. So how can P3Ms validate whether a project can succeed? And if not, convince stakeholders of either the changes necessary to make success possible or the need to kill the project quickly. Cost cutting almost always creates disproportionate benefit cuts. Descoping to save sunk costs often results in little or no benefit. It should be canned altogether. Examples could be the Garden Bridge and the RSC Bridge, which were successfully cancelled before total large expenditure. Both HS2 and the GWR electrification have been descoped against rising costs, delivering less benefits for most costs. Simon.
So whose responsibility is it to call out a failing project and convince stakeholders that changes may be needed? It has to be the people who know about it, and that is why your project needs you. We know that corporate cultures can vary dramatically, and departments and projects can have their own subcultures. And all of this influences how empowered you feel and how empowered you believe you are to raise concerns, and also how they will be received when you raise them. Raising a concern in a culture that doesn't empower you or provide what we often call psychological safety can be a seriously stressful attempt, and even career limiting. Nonetheless, it is our professional duty to act in the best interests of our employers and our clients, and it's unprofessional for us not to speak up. A well-known example is Roger Boisjoli, the American engineer who raised strenuous objections to the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger months before the loss of the spacecraft and its crew in January 1986. Boisjoli correctly predicted that based on earlier flight data, the O-rings on the rocket boosters would fail if the shuttle launched in cold weather. But managers decided to launch despite his warnings. An aspect we'll think about later is that he only presented a single recommendation, which left managers with a very binary choice to either accept or reject his recommendation. Tony, over to you.
So how empowered do you feel to flag up problems? The majority, as we can see, fall in the bottom. So that's encouraging to a certain extent, and it's good that you can be honest. So let's see now how we can help. Andy.
I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised, that so many of our audience have actually are working in that sort of open environment. It's a big contrast to a lot of the clients I've worked for. But anyway, we'd like to present a simple approach suitable for all industry sectors that applies both practical psychology and, well, it applies practical psychology to raising the need for change. This 5-step approach avoids conflict between project stakeholders and project team and minimises loss of face by both through deepening and sharing understanding of the situation and the likely consequences of different scenarios. And the Institute of Civil Engineers publication, A Systems Approach to Infrastructure Delivery, actually echoes this approach. So here are those 5 steps. What is the problem with the project that what is the problem that is making you uneasy? Review the problem situation. Why do we think it won't succeed? What are the success criteria? Understand the success criteria of all the stakeholders. How do they interlink? Fully understand how solving the problem and success criteria are interlinked. Can we meet the needs? Understand whether the proposed solution can really meet the business need and meet all the success criteria. And then prepare, socialize, and present 3 to 5 thoroughly thought through alternatives. They do not form a simple linear flow. Some backtracking may be needed, but one thing is vital: do all the spade work before step 5. Step 1 addresses the what it is that's going wrong question. And steps 2 to 5 address the reason why it hasn't or isn't being addressed.
So the first step is to understand the problem. Why do you, as a responsible project manager, need to do this? Well, you've got to establish some facts from which to argue your case. System thinking offers powerful tools and techniques to overcome groupthink, optimism bias, and confirmation bias. Review the purpose of the project or program. Was this fully understood and agreed by everyone? What has changed? All kinds of tools and models can be used. Adage KISS, keep it simple, is applicable. Often a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it is easily shared, comprehended, and indeed modified. Actor maps, for example, identify what and who is involved, internal and external, and the policy environment within. Do not assume all behavior is driven externally. Culture in any enterprise is a powerful and sometimes divisive force. Another way of presenting graphically to illustrate to your boss, senior line manager, what is going on is by using animated Venn diagrams, as we used earlier and easily built in PowerPoint, for example. A project is successful when the customer says it is, because it addresses the genuine need, provided the need was identified correctly in the first place, of course. There's no glory in delivering what you were asked to on time and on budget if it doesn't work, and you'll probably end up carrying the can. So one has to identify, who do I have to have a concern? Be honest and objective. What are the criteria against which it will fail? Consider establishing your top cover to do the full analysis if it is needed. So do you need top cover to investigate, or maybe a mediator?
The next major issue that we need to tackle is that the business needs to be considered as an ecosystem. It's not merely about the bottom line that the solution is expected to meet. Firstly, has the problem really been identified and defined properly, or just a solution proposed? Have the boundaries of the problem been really probed? Who or what does any solution rely upon, without which one has no control? How does the problem interact with external factors? What are the barriers to understanding the problem? For example, these could be culture or resources, or authority and influence of stakeholders, or perhaps even fear. And lastly, is the problem merely complicated, or is it complex?
So just finishing off there, in sum, looking at the success criteria and identifying the options for moving forward is fundamental. Let's illustrate this with the 737 MAX. Hugh.
Thanks, Andy. The 73 MAX was conceived as an evolution of the 737 and a competitive response to Airbus's hugely efficient A320neo. But it had a fundamental problem which ultimately resulted in 2 fatal crashes, costing 346 lives and billions for Boeing. The central problem was that the technical solution needed for this major development of the plane, MCAS, had itself to be evolved during the design process, to the point that pilots who weren't due to be trained in it at all didn't know what it was doing or how to override it. MCAS had become a safety critical element with a single point of failure, but wasn't originally designed as safety critical. The aircraft had fundamentally become unsafe. Making it safe would also violate other key business requirements, avoiding pilot training, for example, as well as extending delivery times with huge cost and reputational implications for Boeing. So going back to the 4 domains we discussed at the start of this webinar, you could view this as a divergence between program delivery and the needs and benefits. In effect, some assumptions the program had started with turned out not to be valid as it went through the design and development phases. But this reality wasn't ultimately accepted until after the second fatal crash. Amanda.
So in the next step, we need to understand the success criteria of all our stakeholders. So different roles have different and sometimes conflicting success criteria, and those need to be fully understood and validated at an individual level in the context of the program. So recognizing key success criteria for all stakeholders is important to building a consensus between them for changing a project.
The Iceberg model is used a lot in systems thinking, and it's another way of thinking about what is going on as we seek to penetrate beneath the surface appearances to where the real drivers of project success or project failure may be found. The successive layers of the iceberg include the events, which are things that we simply see going on at the surface, patterns of behavior and the performance trends that form over time, underlying structures that influence and drive the patterns of behavior and the trends that we observe, and at the deepest level, the mental models and beliefs from which the structures are created. And we'll return to the iceberg model again in thinking about the 737 MAX example. Amanda.
So in the case of the 737 MAX, if we think about how might a clear understanding of success drivers and the interaction of those success drivers have revealed the threat to both its passengers and to Boeing itself, so commercial success and indeed Boeing's reputation.
So in step 3, we want to understand how those success factors interact. But why model how the success criteria are linked? Fundamentally to identify and deepen your understanding and show up conflicts of interest, supporting interests. Modelling the interlinks helps us to understand where we have supporters and detractors, the divergence of stakeholders' own success drivers, and areas of tension between stakeholders. It may even help reveal competing success criteria for some stakeholders, for example, between personal and professional interests or personal motivation around bonuses versus discharging their accountability. So all of this helps us to engage and manage our stakeholders more effectively. Other models may prove helpful as well. Applying the Iceberg model, for example, can help us reveal the different drivers and the underlying drivers in any given situation. Actor maps and causal loop diagrams help us understand the relationships and dynamics as well. Andy?
Increasing the MCAS power meant the 737 MAX had become unsafe, but ignoring this ticked everyone else's boxes. Their success criteria were satisfied. Together, they overrode safety concerns. Boeing's failure tragically demonstrated that ensuring balance across the key success criteria is vital: quality, safety, commercial, timeliness. But different stakeholders are likely to have more dominant drivers, more power due to their role. So how are success criteria driving your Titanic project, and what needs to happen to bring different perspectives back into an acceptable balance?
Step 4, will the solution deliver what's needed? We need to look through the windscreen at where we're headed. Has the solution we're delivering been verified as really meeting all the business needs? Can it meet the success criteria? Have the outputs been mapped to target outcomes? As the saying goes, if we are to fail, we should fail fast. And that might require studies, concept demonstrators, proof of concepts, simulations, digital modeling before any heavy expenditure. But if those haven't been done effectively, there are key threats.
Perhaps the solution is solving yesterday's problem, not tomorrow's.
It doesn't fix the whole problem, just moves the problem somewhere else.
It's overlooked some of the elements necessary for success.
Not all key requirements were defined at the outset and won't be achieved as planned, for example, resources, training, or the needs of end users.
Maybe it won't meet the quality criteria or even be safe.
And from the customer's perspective, if we deliver the current plans, will they be satisfied and will they pay? We need to check out options and scenarios, redoing if necessary some verification activities. System thinking tools can be very quick and cheap to do this. And if we can, engage trusted experts not involved today to carry out critical reviewing, red team reviews, rough drawing, testing, to bypass groupthink. It's not quite a crystal ball, but
what we've seen in the 737 MAX example is that in allowing commercial success to dominate, aircraft safety was compromised. This caused 2 fatal accidents and damaged Boeing's reputation. It demanded regulatory scrutiny that resulted in the grounding of the entire fleet until its safety had been addressed, and that in turn turned up a couple more design flaws that Boeing had to address. The initial focus, as we see in the causal loop diagram, was on commercial success. However, this compromised aircraft safety, which in turn resulted in fatal crashes, damaging Boeing's reputation, and triggering critical regulatory scrutiny, ultimately stealing the commercial success that was originally targeted. Had COVID not removed demand for aircraft temporarily, the Airbus offering, the main competitor to Boeing, could easily have scooped the pool, and only Boeing's position as a key defense contractor would have made it too important to fail.
So having gone through the previous steps to understand the situation thoroughly, we get to step 5, preparing options to make sure the right one is selected. So why invest all the effort in multiple evaluations when you know only one is the right one?
The psychology of managing up is important. The stakeholder or bosses want to make the decision. If you make a single recommendation, their options are to accept it or make an ill-informed decision of their own, or come up with their own bright idea. If you present multiple options, their options are all laid out for them to make a fully informed decision, clearly showing the impact of each option, and they are likely to choose one. Not always, but usually.
So what goes into the option evaluation?
You should consider all the relevant factors you can identify, including stakeholders, success criteria, for example, market movement, opportunity lost, cost, delays, viability, and achievability.
And how many options should we be looking at?
Well, maybe 3 to 5, depending on what makes sense in the circumstance. Including the do nothing option is de rigueur, but needs truly fully evaluating, including whole life, through life costs, as it puts a spotlight on what is going wrong.
How much effort in evaluating the options?
You need to be comprehensive. Do a global business impact assessment, but be context sensitive. So if the boss loves and trusts you and your judgment and is the final arbiter, then you can probably get away with a light touch. If the boss loves you and trusts you and your judgment, but you have to convince others who don't, you'll have to deep dive. Now, if the boss doesn't love you or trust you or your judgment and has to convince others too, then you absolutely need to deep dive. So using systems thinking tools and techniques enables us to paint a picture, and that picture enables us to get those options and those deep dives across.
When could the 7.3 Max team have changed course? We have some findings that come from the US Congress investigation into the background of the accident to try and illustrate this. So the project starts with apparent project success, lucrative commercial launch amidst intense competition, but fatal quality and safety flaws revealed through 2 tragic accidents. There's faulty design and performance assumptions, breaching Boeing's own design rules. Engineering concerns and whistleblowers were ignored. Tremendous financial and timescale pressures, Boeing exerting too much influence over the FAA, the regulator, in relation to certification, and even later, the FAA were the last regulator to ground the plane. And there was a culture of concealment. Beliefs in safety and quality gradually overwhelmed by beliefs in the preeminence of revenue and profits.
When we look at the findings from the investigations, we can see how they relate to the Iceberg model that we discussed earlier. And then eventually thinking about when and how these various levels show up, we find that the deeper we look, the earlier the warning signs and the earlier the opportunities are to change course. So when might the 737 MAX team have changed course, and what alternative options could they have developed? As non-experts and as Boeing outsiders, we can't really know. But here are some speculative possibilities of options that might have been developed once it became apparent that the MCAS solution was safety critical. Delaying delivery to avoid a single point of failure. Developing additional pilot training to ensure that pilots were aware of the risk with the MCAS and how to deal with it. Reducing the power and authority of the MCAS solution and increasing training to compensate for this. And of course, as we discussed earlier, the do nothing option to maintain project delivery to schedule, but with unmitigated safety and reputational risks. Referring back to our Iceberg model, it's apparent that any presentation of these options would need to tackle those underlying mental models and structures that had allowed the project to get into this state. And obviously the do nothing option that was the current course of the trajectory of the project. Calling those things out, calling out the unmitigated safety and reputational risks that were later seen to materialize in the catastrophic failures.
So we've gone through our 5-step process, which we have tested and proven to work. So step 1, review the problem situation. Why won't the project or program succeed? Step 2, understand the success criteria of all the stakeholders. Step 3, fully understand how solving the problem and success criteria are interlinked. Step 4, understand whether the proposed solution can really meet all the business need and meet all the success criteria. Then step 5 is prepare, socialize, and only then present 3 to 5 thoroughly thought through alternatives. We hope it will be useful and effective the next time you're faced with managing an uncomfortable situation upwards. Now, in the case of the audience we've got on live, that doesn't sound terribly likely.
We do have some key points about the options you evaluate. Firstly, make the options logical and bomb-proof. No visible bias towards any option. Secondly, exclude contentious options beyond the brief. If the management want to explore other options, help them. Thirdly, don't recommend an option. Leave it to the management to decide. Then it's in their skin, in the decision, not yours. Finally, tailor option presentations to the individual stakeholders, their interests and perils.
So we've got another audience poll now. Does this approach seem useful to you?
So a huge majority picked yes, I will try it out.
That's great to hear. Okay, I think we're now in a situation where
we've also got some questions coming in as well. A couple of similar questions from Sharon Ashok, asking about how to raise concerns speaking up when most of us are hesitant or really don't want to do it and might be seen as being a pain in the ass, to put it bluntly.
I'm happy to take that one. I'm frequently seen as a pain in the ass. I think it's about how you position it. So I think the approach that we've put together is very much think through the conversation you want to have. Also think about the stakeholders, supporters, line managers that you want to pitch that to. I do get the challenge that coming in too hard cannot necessarily get what you need. So it's part of that. If you think about those points 1 and 2, really think about what it is that you want to raise, how you want to raise it, and how it might be received by those stakeholders. So I'm not saying take a softly approach, but it might be worth doing the initial thinking and then doing a bit of sounding out to understand how that might land.
Thanks, Amanda.
If I can just add something to that, I mean, this approach that we've just described is really targeted at sort of dealing with people outside the project, the stakeholders outside the project, and to be led by a project leader level. But that technique can actually be used to raise concerns within a project, I think. But it is really about thinking through why you're concerned, what you think the issue is, and using and modeling, analyzing the impact of that, so that you're not going whinging about something. You're raising a concern that something might happen under a set of circumstances. It's very easy to get a reputation as a whinger if you go along and talk about problems. The classic thing to that is that well-known management saying, I don't want problems, I want solutions. So never raise a problem without talking about what the solutions might be.
Thanks, Andy. Some really good feedback in here, some around the importance of risk management and estimating, for example, as part of your kind of delivery framework, which I think we'd all absolutely support. Question here from Becky saying, how valid is the statement that we would have less critical point projects if we implemented proper risk management throughout projects This would enable you to see deeper into the iceberg faster. So really talking about or asking about the importance of getting to those deeper levels.
Yeah, I'll say a little on that. Yeah, I mean, I think most project failures you can look at from the lens of risk management and what did and didn't occur to support that. So there's certainly truth in that statement. I think if we think about our 737 MAX example, there would have been no doubt a substantial risk register, a lot of which would have been focused on commercial risks, schedule risks, what the success criteria were that were driving the program at that time. And I guess the significance of the risks around safety, not only in terms of the ethics of running a safe airline, but also in terms of the reputation and the commercial impacts on Boeing that eventually emerged, was probably the thing that was not accepted or taken seriously to the extent that it needed to be. And I guess that's where, working through the implication of risks, not just in the sphere that you're working in, but to the total impact or to the total success of the project is probably what was needed in that instance, and often doesn't get seen followed through completely in a lot of projects. So yeah, certainly agree with that statement that you can see things through the risk lens and diagnose most of the iceberg through that.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Another question here from Sarah asking, where do you see legal checks and balances, including governance, compliance, and perhaps ethics as a stakeholder? These things are often seen as a pain in the arse, but a necessary one.
So it's like quality managers, and yet quality managers are there to make sure that you deliver something that works. Yeah. I mean, these are very definitely stakeholders that have to be considered, and their success criteria built into the understood and how they interact with everything else. Simon's obviously from the nuclear industry. Others of us have worked with the nuclear industry. It's vitally important that the general public and pressure groups within the general public are treated as stakeholders. And another group that I have seen in other organisations treated like absolute rubbish are unions. Unions are important stakeholders, and I had a marvellous story from one lady about how working with the Royal Mail, by engaging with the unions, they managed to power through a change that would have been a complete failure without engaging them. And oddly enough, a lot of the management were ex-union conveners themselves and had a very negative attitude towards engaging with the unions.
Yeah, okay. And I would suggest that there's two really simple things when you're looking at programs and projects: to look at the system perspective from internal viability and external completeness, and it's picking up those extra views that Sarah mentioned that is absolutely vital.
Thanks, Tony. Another question, avoiding failure by killing the project. Hasn't somebody already failed by progressing into the project or onto the project until you reach the killing point? And the example raised is the Garden Bridge, where approximately £53 million was spent prior to its cancellation, which is a lot of money.
Perhaps because I put that example in, yes, I would totally agree. Now, interesting in Abbey Wood, the introduction of smart acquisition brought in 2 phases for projects. Initial gate, and you went forward with all the previous costings that had been put in, timelines decided and things like that, or estimated. And then you would work through a whole series of modeling, programming, whatever you needed to do. And then you come to main gate, where that was the decision where you would either move forward with the project or bin it. And with highly complex programs, you're going to have to do something like that. Now, I think in the case of the Garden Bridge and things like that, that was more perhaps of an individual's wish to do something perhaps looking green and great, or a great thing to do for London or whatever else. So it was indeed quite a lot of wasted money. But if it saved 100 million, so at least it was canned in time.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good point you raised, Tony, that, and I think we mentioned it earlier, that it seems like a good idea at the time, and so you have to invest money into it to do all those studies, and arguably the Garden Bridge failed fast. You know, they spent that amount of money, and then they made the right decision and said this is not a good idea. We'll cancel it. By comparison, we have other projects where things keep going on and there's de-scoping, and we end up with an awful lot of money spent and very little benefit delivered. So it's the Garden Bridge is a good example of cancelling something which would have delivered negligible benefit, frankly.
Okay, still got loads of questions coming in, which is fabulous. Next one, how can you encourage decision makers to select an option without you making a recommendation? And Chris is saying in his experience, this is usually the first question project boards ask of you. So why not make a recommendation?
If you make a recommendation, it's like forcing a card on someone. If you're offering them a choice, if they ask you for a recommendation, then give them a recommendation, but you explain why it's your recommendation, right? Don't put it forward as a recommendation because you're offering them 3 or 5 cards, but one's pushed forward. It's about the psychology of decision making. They want to be in control. Not unreasonably, they want to make the decision. It's up to them to ask you for a recommendation.
I think it's worth reflecting that every recommendation is a product of the success criteria that you've applied upon it. And so in going to decision makers, you are, inevitably having to make assumptions or spell out for them what you believe their success criteria to be. They may actually want to differ and say, well, what if we changed our thinking on that? What if you've misunderstood our success criteria? What would that do to your recommendation? So I think if you go in with a recommendation, you need the tools and the flexibility to be able to reassess that if you understand that your understanding of their success criteria is different, or if they indeed change their minds as to what they actually want. So I'm very accustomed to providing recommendations. That's generally how I've been trained, but I am aware that each one of those needs to be rejigged if success criteria change, and that's a discussion you need to be ready to have with decision makers and boards.
Yeah, and that's the whole basis of this process that we're suggesting, is that you understand the success criteria, that before you even start talking about there being a problem and that there's a need for change, that you do the spade work beforehand rather than go in with a recommendation and then let them turn around and challenge everything that you're saying or doing. And
I think I would also
is a very common phenomenon.
Yeah, I would also add that we all view a problem differently, and what we're trying to illustrate here is that using systems thinking tools, you can paint a picture of your understanding of what the problem is and considering all the various factors, and hopefully that would either be confirmed by the decision makers, or they'll be offering their own point of view and then adjust your model accordingly. And from then collectively you can make a decision based on a consensus view of the problem.
Okay, thanks, Cesar. I'm conscious of time, so we're probably down to the last 1 or 2 questions, even though we've got probably another dozen that we won't have time to get to. So apologies if yours hasn't been called out. But this one here, which is, I think, speaks to the difference between the responsibility of the project manager and the responsibility for what he or she is delivering. So from Becky, if someone has a job title which confers that they have to deliver a certain project, can it become difficult for them to objectively suggest that something else should be done, in effect to kill the project or change the project that they've been given to deliver? One, having been in that very situation between a CTO and a COO, the CTO wanted to deliver a technical solution to the business, and the business wanted a fully working business solution, which became very challenging, shall we say, and ended up with me tendering my resignation to the CTO, saying to him that if he needed someone to deliver just the technical solution and wasn't prepared to look at the business needs, then he needed someone other than me to deliver it for him. And I think that's the point. I didn't feel in any sense that I was failing at that point as the project manager, but the project was going to fail unless, in my opinion, my professional opinion, we took a different approach. So it is possible to draw a distinction, I think, and it's important to between those two things. Don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Hugh, I'd just reflect that the further down the track a project goes, the more wedded it becomes to a solution, to the point that actually the project and perhaps a lot of the roles within the project become synonymous with that solution. So you're no longer focused on the beneficial change that a project is intended for, but just simply the delivery of a solution. And if that solution goes off track, then yeah, you're in a difficult position. So yeah, part of the answer is let's keep our roles, our project roles, focused on the beneficial change that's sought rather than necessarily wedded to a particular solution.
Excellent point. Thank you, Simon. I think I'll have to hand back to Andy to wrap up the webinar.
So just to wrap up then, thanks for joining us today. Looks like we've prompted many thoughts about managing up a bit differently. If you are an APM member, you already know about the range of benefits, but if you're not, as a member, you can enjoy a wide range of benefits, including free or discounted entry to a nationwide program of good practice events, learning from others, and supporting your CPD. So find out more on the APM website on the membership page. What I would point out, we've got some links up there about, there's the APM system thinking SIG itself. So we've got some links to finding out more about systems thinking. We've got some of those videos are from either a full webinar and expurgated videos that I've managed to edit down myself. And if you want to find out more about project success and fitness for purpose, then take a look at that Routledge book, Project Success and Quality, Balancing the Iron Triangle. Can't help plugging it. I wrote it. But it's full of real case studies, It tries to bring things to life. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. I think that is time for us to go. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.